Hey, what's up YouTube? Today we are going to be starting another Sveltekit project, but this one will be a full stack application that leverages Firebase for authentication and storage. We'll be building a file portal that allows you to upload, download, and delete files in the cloud. If you'd like to see the finished source code, there is a link to the GitHub repo in the description below. Before I get started, I did get some feedback that the digital green screen I was using was a little staticky and fuzzy around my head and that it was distracting, so I won't be using it moving forward. For today's video, we'll be starting out with getting Firebase authentication set up. There are other videos on YouTube of people doing this, but none of them perfectly match my use case. They were either using TypeScript or storing user IDs in stores. So I decided that I would show my approach. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Okay, take two recording this video. I recorded the entire thing and I didn't realize that my code wasn't zoomed in and that it was super hard to read. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with our Firebase authentication Sveltekit project by starting with a Sveltekit project. So we'll run npm init svelte at next, no slash, and we'll call this file portal yt. All right, we're gonna do a skeleton project. We're not using TypeScript, not using ESLint, not using Prettier, and they did recently introduce Playwright for browser testing. I'm going to be doing a video on that shortly, but it's not in the scope of this video, so we'll also say no. And then if I change directories into file portal yt and run npm I for npm install, we have our npm node or our node modules installed, and if I do code dot in this directory, I have the Visual Studio extensions installed. So here is our Sveltekit project, and we are actually going to just make sure this time that my code is zoomed in. So obviously that's a little too small, and I forget on Visual Studio it's a weird keyboard shortcut for zoom. I'll find it. Give me a second. Appearance, zoom in. There we go. We'll do that one more time. Appearance, zoom in. Okay, and I'm hoping that is large enough. I'll make my file explorer a little smaller over here. Okay, so we have our stereotypical index page that comes with a Sveltekit project, and we are going to go ahead and just leave this because this video is going to focus on Firebase setups, so and Auth setup. So real quick, before I get into the code, I will just show you. If we go to nextgenfileexplorer.com, it's a little slow to load on the first render because I'm using Render's free tier, but you can see we have NextGen File Explorer. So I have built this already, and if I log in, I gain access to like a file portal where I can like drag different files into different folders. I can sign out and it'll take me back, and if I try to go to index or the home page, it'll bring me right back to login because I don't have access. So this is what we're going to be building. So let's go ahead and go to localhost 3000. There's not going to be anything there, so let's go ahead and open up a terminal and do npm run dev. That's the command to run Sveltekit. Oh, and I need to be on Windows Subsystem Linux instead of PowerShell because that's where I have my Sveltekit commands installed. So npm run dev, and if we go back to localhost, we see welcome to Sveltekit. So we're gonna mostly leave this alone because we're just focusing on auth. So let's go back here and create some files in our routes folder. And remember, routes will do dynamic routing based on the file system. So you can do new file, and you can do login.svelte. We're also going to create signup.svelte. we're going to create a underscore layout dot svelte. And finally, we are going to create an endpoint or a JavaScript file called fb.js. And this is where we're going to instantiate all of our Firebase code. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get our Firebase boilerplate. And I'm going to switch accounts here. Go to console. And we'll just do add project. We'll call this file portal YT. I don't recommend Google Analytics because it's not GDPR compliant without a banner. I use plausible.io, and I will be doing a video on that here in the next few weeks because I really like their service. So it's going to provision resources, and we'll just give that a second. And if you're not familiar with Firebase, what it is it is a platform as a service. So it's owned by Google. It allows you to set up a NoSQL database, either a real-time database that is not structured like your traditional document database, but is NoSQL. And then they also have a document database called Firestore. They have storage, which we'll be taking advantage for our file portal. They have authentication, which I use in a lot of my applications, which is what we're setting up in this video. But odds are, if you're on this video, you're already familiar with Firebase. So we'll go ahead and say continue. And we'll create a web app. And we'll just call this file portal YT. I don't need Firebase hosting. If you haven't checked out my video on how to deploy Sveltekit apps for free on Render, the link will be above. So let's register our app. And so we have to, it tells you have to install Firebase, so let's start with that. So I'll go ahead and shut off the dev server and just do a clear, and let me pull up my console window here. We'll do npm I Firebase. And while that's installing, let's go back to Firebase and hit the copy button for our initialize config block. So you need this config to take advantage of things like storage and auth, to use the APIs for that. So this looks like it's still installing. So go ahead and just copy all of that code into fb.js, and this error is going to go away as soon as this is done installing. I'm going to remove some of these comments just because I don't need them, and you can see that error did go away. Feel free to keep comments if you want them. I'll just keep these. And then finally, we'll do an export default app. So we're just exporting this constant, which initializes our Firebase config. So our final step for Firebase configuration is we'll go to console, storage, authentication, because today's video is on authentication. We'll say get started, and we're just going to do email and password. But if you go back here, you can see there's tons. So if you want to offer additional OAuth providers, they've got a lot here, which is awesome. So we'll do email, password, enable, and save. All right, so now we have email and password enabled. We go back to localhost. It's not running. So let's go back here, do npm run dev, and you'll notice nothing has changed. It's still, well, maybe. What's going on? Odd. I know what's wrong. We already created our layout file. All right, so the layout file allows you to set a layout that renders on every page, and because it's blank right now, it's not showing the index. So what we need to do is we need the slot. And what a slot allows us to do is it allows us to render that page's content. So it's just a self-terminating tag like that. So now if I save and go back, you'll see our index page. But, you know, it would kind of be pointless to do that in layout if we, you know, weren't actually using it. So let's go ahead and set up a script tag in here, and this is where we'll start working with Firebase. Sorry, I can't type today. And so first things first, let's import app from FBJS. So that's going to initialize Firebase for us. And then we're also going to import onMount. And onMount is and that's going to be from Svelte. onMount is a lifecycle method, if you will, if you're familiar with React and class-based React. It's a lifecycle method that allows us to say, after all the components mount on the page, do XYZ. And then we're also going to need get auth and on auth state changed from Firebase auth, because we'll be using those. And last but not least, we will need goto. Import goto from app navigation. So this is built-in built-in Sveltekit functionality that allows us to redirect our page. So let's go ahead and save that so I get my formatting. We're going to go ahead and start with our onMount function. onMount, we'll pass in an empty arrow function, and inside that we'll say constant auth equals get auth. So this gets the current auth from Firebase. And then we pass in that auth to on auth state changed like this. And then we give it an arrow function with the argument of user, which gives us access to user after this function is, or while this function is being executed. So we'll do if user. So if there's a user, we're going to console.log welcome to the file portal. And we'll do more with this later. We're not going to do anything with it right now necessarily. But later on in the tutorial, in a future video, when we actually build the file portal, we're going to use this function a little more. It's just good to get it set up now. This else is what's important. So we're going to do go to login. And so basically, when the auth state changes, if they're not logged in, it monitors for auth state changes. And if they're not logged in, it redirects them to login. So now, if we go to login and add just an h1 of login and go back to our application and refresh, you can see it redirects us to login because we're not logged in. So that is how you can force users to go back to your login page if you don't want them to access some content. But obviously we don't just want a h1 in there, so let's go ahead and create our login form. Now I am going to copy over some code from what I've already written for this, but we will walk through it and I'll make sure that you have a full understanding of what's going on at the end. So first we need to in source create a new folder called lib, and then in there we're going to create components, and then in components we're going to create login. And you may be wondering why all the nested directories. Well, we're going to have a lot of different kinds of components when we actually build this application in a future video. Right now we're just focusing on login. And so in here in login we're going to create login form.svelte. Awesome. So in login form.svelte we're going to start with a script, which I really seem to not be able to type today. We're going to use goto again from app navigation. And then we're also going to need get auth again. Sign in with email and password, fully camel cased, and create user with email and password, fully camel cased, which if you don't know what camel casing is, if you're really new to programming, it means lowercase first letter. Every subsequent word has an uppercase letter to start it. And that's going to be from Firebase auth as well. All right, so we've got our imports here. We do have an export, which is our property. and that's going to be title. And so I'm going to show you a little trick to where you can use almost the same login form for login and sign up, and you just check title, and if title is login, you'll show them the login form. If title is sign up, you'll show them the sign up form. So it's just giving us this yellow squiggly line because title is not being used yet, so let's make sure it's used. But first, let's get our auth set up. So constant auth equals get auth again. We're going to perform that again. And we're going to have a function here called login. And in our login function, we're going to get our email from our document. And it's going to be email input as the ID dot value. And then I'll just go ahead and clone that down, and this is going to be pass input, and this will be password. Now you may be wondering, Ryan, what's the deal with the red squigglies? Well, due to a recent change in Sveltekit, your JS config file is actually always extending TypeScript config, so it's going to throw some errors on types. If you're like me and you're not using TypeScript yet, you can change this to JS config to make the error go away, but before we deploy in a future video, we will be changing it back, and it is going to throw an error on your JS config file. You can just close it and ignore it for now, but you'll see the red squiggly lines go away on the value. So we get email and password values from our form. Okay, so here's where that title comes into play. So if title equals login, then we're going to be using sign in with email and password because they're logging in, they're not creating an account, which takes in our current auth, the email, and the password. And then from there, it's a promise, so we can do .then, pass in an arrow function with user credential, which allows us to access the user credential after the promise is resolved. And so constant user equals user credential dot user. And then I want to walk through what I'm doing here, but let me type it out. So we are going to do a local storage set item UID user.uid. All right, so you may be saying, Ryan, why would you set the user ID in local storage? I use local storage because using a store in Sveltekit is not as static as I want it to be. The first time I built this, I strictly stored my UIDs in stores. And because we have a lot of functions listening to Firebase, it was constantly invalidating the UID in the store, and I putzed with it for a really long time and I couldn't get it to work. So, you know, some people might throw a fuss, but I think it's perfectly acceptable to set user ID in local storage. We're not setting the token in local storage. Firebase takes care of all of that on the back end. We're just storing the user ID, which is going to allow us to access that user's particular files and upload that user's particular files in the end application. So we're going to set the user ID in local storage. If you're not familiar with local storage, I'm going to do a video on cookies, local storage, session storage, all that stuff in the future. So be on the lookout. And I haven't said it already, but if you like this kind of content, subscribe. I know I keep saying I'm going to do all these videos. I have a long list in my Notion board of all these different videos I'm going to do. So be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps out the video, and we can stay in touch. So after we set local storage UID, we'll use handy dandy goto again, and we'll just go to /, which is our project root, our index. So that's sign in with email and password. Well, then we're also going to do a .catch and pass in an arrow function with error and do a console.error error, just in case something goes wrong. Then, you know, this is all if the title equals login, so we'll do else, because what if our title is sign up? Well, we're just going to copy all of this. Yep, all of this. Sorry, formatting was throwing me off there. Drop it in here, and we're just going to change this to create user with email and password. So instead of signing them in, it creates a new user for them. And that's on the sign-in page. So this is all well and good. Our login logic is in place. Our sign up logic is in place. But if we go back here, there's no form and there's nothing in login anymore. Well, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and create our actual markup for our component. Well, now I am just going to copy and paste this in, and we'll walk through it because most of this is ripped directly out of Bootstrap 5. We will be using Bootstrap 5 for this application. It's just the easiest way and quickest way to quickly create a minimum viable product. I don't suggest using just like default Bootstrap example code for final production apps because it's not that unique. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of videos on CSS and creating your own CSS in Svelte and that kind of thing. But for the purposes of this video, we're just going to go ahead and use Bootstrap, which means we have to go and get Bootstrap's files, and I am going to just go ahead and steal the CSS here in the form of a CDN link. This isn't suggested or recommended for production apps because you want to make sure your CDNs are trusted and it increases load time and that kind of thing, but Bootstrap has a pretty reliable CDN, and at the end of the day it's just for this YouTube video. So now let's go back to our login form. I did put in a wrapper class of login which has some CSS, and I will paste that in as well, and you can get that in the repo if I'm going too fast here. But essentially all it is in login I'm adding some padding, I'm readjusting some widths and centering some cards, and then I'm just setting some widths for mobile responsiveness. So we'll go ahead and save that and then walk through this. It's a card from Bootstrap. I bind the title property to the card title. And then on our form submit, we prevent default. So on submit, prevent default. This is how we handle click events or events in general in Sveltekit. We fire our login function. And then I do some conditional checking. So if title is not login, go ahead and show an email help hint that says we'll never share your email with anyone else. You really only want to see that on sign up. And then vice versa, if title is login, you want to show the link to sign up. So let's go ahead and save this. Make sure if you do take this approach, you change your IDs for your inputs to match the ones in your login function. And then the last thing we need to do is go ahead and import that. So we'll do a script tag in our login.svelte and say import login form from lib components. And usually this auto completes, but I think because I've been changing that JS config file or something, it's been a little sketchy. So login form.svelte, but it will work. And then we're going to say login form with a title of login. Oh, and that's got to be the right casing. And that's for login, and then we'll just drop that into set sign up, and we'll call this sign up, not ip up. Save that, save this, and now if we go back to our application, we can see our login form, which is great. And I can type in an email address and hit submit, and nothing happens because that user doesn't exist. Now, obviously, you want to do some additional kind of maybe error handling to pop up like a little red message that says wrong password, or as a general cybersecurity tip, do not put user doesn't exist. It's a quick and easy way to enumerate users. You want to put a very vague message, basically there was a login error, try again. But we'll go ahead and sign up. And actually, I'll use a valid email and hit submit. and you can see I am now seeing the index page, and I am logged in. If I go to my session storage, so if I go to application, or not session storage, local storage, you can see UID, and you can ignore is logged in, but UID, and it's my user ID. So there you have it. And we will be covering sign out when we actually build the application. But this is how you can authenticate applications using Firebase and Sveltekit. And yeah, if you do it differently, or you have any suggestions for me, or you just have feedback for this video, leave it as a comment below. And don't forget to hit that like button if you liked this video, and subscribe if you want to see more like it. Anyway, thanks for sticking around and watching how I use Firebase and Sveltekit to authenticate my apps. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll actually be building this application that allows you to, browse files, or upload files, download, delete files from Firebase storage. And until next time, cheers.